So I'm going to go ahead and get started with the funding seminar. My name is Stephen. I'm the Senior AVP of Student Organizations for AS. So today we're going to go over the funding guide, the funding principles, and the two most common funds that student organizations apply for, which is programming and operating funds, and then just some important notes for when you're applying. So first off, the funding guide is kind of your comprehensive guide for all AS funding policies and procedures. It can be found on the AS funding guide. It can be found by clicking the AS funding guide link on the finance.ucsd.edu website, which is also an important website. Any updates will be posted there. And so this is going to have everything, all the steps for applying for funding, what each type of fund is used for, including the two that I'm not going to go over today, and also a table of deadlines for when your applications need to be submitted by. So I'm also going to go over the funding principles. So the funding principles are kind of what we're looking for in your student organization event. We want your student organization event to include these principles. So the first one is we want it to apply to a wide audience of undergraduate students. We want it to advance student interest and enhance student wellness. We want it to encourage collaboration between on-campus groups, educate through positive learning outcomes, and contribute to the UCSD community. I'm also going to go over who can request AS funding. So that's going to be any principal member of a CSI registered undergraduate student organization. What that means is your student organization has to be registered through CSI as an undergraduate or a mixed student organization. But if it is a mixed, at least 50% of your student organization has to be undergraduate in order to receive AS funding. So just keep that in mind. So there's 4 types of AS funding. The first is programming funds. Then there's operating funds, tournament and competition funds, and interest-free programming loans. So today, I'm just going to go over programming and operating funds, as those are the 2 largest. However, you can either show up to my office hours or email me if you have questions about the other 2, but programming and operating are the 2 biggest ones. So I want to make sure those are covered and that you get the best use of your time. So programming funds, what they're used for, they're pretty much used for most undergraduate events that are going to be hosted by student organizations. They do have a couple of requirements. The big one is that it has to be open to the entire undergraduate population. If it's only open to certain individuals, then you won't be able to receive AS funding. There's a couple other requirements that it has to satisfy, such as you can't charge an entrance fee and stuff like that. And there can't be any like mandatory donations. But you can find those all on the funding guide under programming funds. So a couple of examples of what programming funds can be used for are general body meetings, study jams, and speaker events. So yeah, those are just a couple of examples, but you can use them really for anything as long as it satisfies all the requirements on the funding guide. So just like a little overview of when you're applying. So the application can be found on the finance.ucsd.edu website. And when you're applying, there's a couple of things that you have to include. First off is going to be a room confirmation. Please don't forget this. If you don't have a room confirmation, it's going to be an automatic denial without chance for appeal, and you don't want that to happen. Second of all, when you submit your room confirmation, please check the maximum capacity. If the maximum capacity of the room is less than the expected attendance, then we're only going to fund up to the maximum capacity. So just make sure that those 2 things align with each other. Second off, official invoices. You have to make sure this is official. If it's self-calculated, then we're not going to be able to accept it. And when you do get an official invoice, make sure tip or tax is included. If it's not included, we can only fund up to what the invoice says. So if it's not included, you're going to have to pay for the tax or the tip by yourself out of pocket. And obviously nobody wants to do that. And also it needs to have the expected attendance. That's how we base how much funding you can get off of. So just make sure that's right. And programming funds are on a first come, first served basis until the programming allocations are used up for each quarter. So just keep that in mind when applying. Room confirmations. I very much want to emphasize this. Please make sure they're official and they must be reserved prior to applying for funding. If it's not attached to your application, it's going to be an automatic denial. So please make sure that that's reserved prior to applying. Reservations must include a couple things, including the date, the venue, and how many people, the maximum capacity of the room. So please make sure that's all included in the room confirmation. And again, want to reiterate this, make sure it is official. I don't want anybody getting rejected because they just have an email from somebody. It has to be an official confirmation. An example is if you go from university centers, they will send you a PDF with an official stamp and all the information about your room confirmation. So if you do it through UCEN or university centers, just attach that to your application and you're good. Very important. If you forget any of these things on your application, you must submit a new application. If you email me, I won't be able to add anything. And you won't be able to go back and add anything. So if you make a mistake, it'll be easier if you just submit a new application right away. It'll make sure that instead of emailing me, if you email me and you don't happen to be able to submit the new application until after the deadline, there's nothing we can do about that. So just make sure to submit it. We're only going to approve whichever one has all the information. So it's not an issue. Just make sure to submit a new application if you do make a mistake on your initial one. So programming funds, the amount of money that you can request is dependent on the attendance for in-person and hybrid events. So that's in the top chart. For example, if you have 20 undergraduate students, you can request up to 150. But if you have 160 undergraduate students there, you can request up to 3,000. For virtual events, regardless of your attendance, it's going to be $300 maximum. When you do this, make sure that the attendance is not like a very big overestimate. For example, if you say the expected attendance is 200 people, but only 10 people show up, we do have people who show up to the events, and your student organization can get in trouble if the attendance is drastically different than the expected attendance. If it's not a massive difference, that's okay. We understand it is just an estimate, but do make sure that it's not a drastic difference between them. And a note is a maximum of $250 of the money you're awarded for each application can be put towards promotional material. So just make sure not to go over that, otherwise we won't be able to approve it. Also make sure not to go over the maximum you can request for the amount for the expected undergraduate students. Otherwise, we are going to have to make choices on which line items to fund and which ones to not. And we obviously don't know what's most important to your student organization and the funding. So just make sure not to go over that. It makes it easier on both ends. Okay, and these are going to be the deadlines. So when you apply for programming funds, you must submit your application 6 weeks prior to your event. So this is on the top left is the kind of when things need to be, what kind of like the order of what happens once you apply for funding. So 6 weeks prior to your event, you're going to apply for funding and submit your application to AS. 5 weeks prior, we're going to go ahead in SOFAB and review your application. And then we're either going to approve or deny your application depending on if we think the information provided is sufficient and if it coincides with the funding principles. So no matter whether your application is approved or denied, you're going to want to start your TAP process to make sure that it's done in time in case you do get an appeal. And you have to start your TAP at least 21 days before the event. If you do get denied, you will have this week to submit your appeal, and your appeal will be reviewed in the finance committee, and the finance committee will make a decision regarding whether they think the information provided is now sufficient. And after that, 2 weeks prior to your event is when your TAP is going to be due. Make sure to submit your TAP. If you don't submit your TAP, you're not going to be able to get your funding. Okay, and on the bottom right is a chart for winter quarter. On the left column, very left column, is going to be the week you want to host your event. And the middle column is going to be the last day to apply for funding for an event held during that week. So for example, if you want to host an event during week 1 of winter quarter, so between January 3rd and 9th, the latest you can apply is Friday, November 5th. So just make sure, this is all on the finance website under the funding guide. So just make sure that you submit your application in time. We don't want anybody getting denied because they didn't submit it in time. So just make sure to stay on top of that. Okay, common mistakes. So there's a couple of common mistakes that I see a lot in applications. The first off is using old invoices. Prices usually change as time goes on. And if you submit an old invoice, you might still get approved for funding. This is a big might. You still don't want to do it because there is a chance that you do get rejected or denied. And in the case that you do get approved, prices might have changed, and we can only fund what's on the invoice. So say that you requested $700 because that's what the invoice says, but the new price is $800. You're only going to get $700, which means you're going to have to pay $100 out of pocket. So just make sure to use an up-to-date invoice in the most current one. That makes it easier and saves student orgs money. Do not submit a self-calculated invoice. If you submit a self-calculated invoice, we won't approve your application. It will be denied. We just don't know if that's what you're actually gonna spend your money on, or if you're overestimating or underestimating. So it has to be an official invoice. That's very important. Not attaching official room confirmations. It must be official. If it's not official, then we don't know if you actually have a room reservation or not. So just make sure that it's official and it has everything I listed before. And then another common mistake is not reaching out if you have any questions. I'm here to help you. So if you have any questions, just email me. Sometimes there's confusion on stuff, but I'll be able to give you a definite answer and make sure that everything on your application is good. So my email will be in the last slide. But yes, please reach out if you have any questions. It'll make sure that you don't get denied for something small, and it'll just make everything easier. So TAP forms. TAP forms are very important, especially when applying for programming funds. They're required for almost all events on campus, but especially if you're using AS funding, you are required no matter what to submit a TAP form. You have to begin your TAP form no later than 21 days before the event, and that's calendar days, not working days. So you just have to begin it 3 weeks before your event. And you have to finish that no later than 14 days before your event. Make sure to finish it. If you don't finish it in time, you won't be able to receive your AS funding. So it's very important that you complete that before the deadline. And if you have any questions or you're a little bit confused on anything on the TAP form, just contact your CSI advisor. They'll be able to help you with anything you need. To find out if you're not sure who your CSI advisor is, you can go to the CSI website. The link is on the bottom. And you go to join an org and student organization advisors. when you go to student organization advisors, it's going to have a list of all the advisors and their email and the student organizations that they cover. So for example, not for example, it's split into, the advisors are split into type of student organization. So you're just going to go down, find which one covers your student organization, and you can email them for any help or anything you need, any help on a TAP form or anything like that. They're a very good resource if you're a little bit confused on the TAP form. Okay, the second most common type of funds that AS funds is operating funds. They can be used for flyers, banners, posters, etc. There's a more exhaustive list on the funding guide. So just make sure to look at the funding guide under operating funds to make sure what you want to buy is covered by operating funds. But kind of a general idea is operating funds will be used for anything that promotes student organizations or student organization events. To get access to your operating funds, contact your SLBO fund manager with an invoice and what you plan to use it for, and they can help you get that set up. And then there is a maximum you're not allowed to use, or each student organization is only allocated $300 per student organization per year. And on top of that, there is more student organizations than there is funds available. So use just, if the money allocated towards operating funds runs out, then that is it. There's no more. So just make sure if you want to use that, not to go over $300, and to just keep in mind that there is a limit to how much student orgs can apply. So important notes: no policy in the funding guide is meant for interpretation. If it seems unclear to you, please reach out to me. That way, if it is something that is unclear, we can change it on the funding guide. But also, we don't want you making small mistakes that cause your application to get denied. So if you're not sure about a policy, please reach out to me, because no policy is meant to be interpreted, or meant to be up for interpretation. So yeah, we want to make sure it's very straightforward and that you don't make a mistake because you were unsure about something. Another important note: no exceptions are going to be made. If we make an exception for one student organization, we have to make it for every student organization, and we just can't do that. So to make it fair, we cannot make any exceptions for any student organization. So yeah, just know that. Another one, just apply early. It makes it easier. If you guys make a mistake, you guys can go back and fix it, and stuff like that. Yeah, so just make sure to apply early. It'll make it easier for you guys and make sure that you guys have a better chance of receiving funding from AS in case you do make a mistake on your application. Okay, and there's two key contacts that you can ask questions to. The first off is Cameron, which is the financial controller, and me, the senior AVP of student organizations. I should be the first contact if you do have any questions. And if I can't answer them, then I will forward them to Cameron. However, I should still be the first contact, and I should be able to answer pretty much all of your guys' questions. So any questions you have, just shoot me an email and I'll respond as soon as I have time to, which I try to respond to emails about once or twice per day, so it shouldn't be too long. And if you don't hear from me, it's probably because either I need help with the question or I just didn't have time to go on that day. But yeah, I usually tend to respond fairly quickly. Shoot me an email and I can help you with any questions you have. Thank you for coming.